Hi students, in this video I'm going to talk about the Great Depression. I ended the last video talking about Herbert Hoover, how he arrives in office and everyone expects that as a successful businessman he's going to lead the United States to greater and greater prosperity. And so we see increasingly aggressive and reckless speculation on the Wall Street stock market in 1928 and into 1929. We see about $1 billion in swaps and shares changing hands during this year. This is especially reckless trading because it's a practice that's called buying on the margins. It means that the investor is not able to buy the full stock themselves, so they buy a portion of it, sometimes as little as 10%, and a bank will pick up the rest. And people continue to do this and wait for the shares to rise, and you've got a bigger and bigger bubble of debt that's building up in the hands of these banks. And at the same time, the economy of the United States during this period is naturally slowing. It's naturally slowing as a result of overproduction and underconsumption. That mass production has been so successful that the consumers are not able to keep up with what's being produced. And so the profit margins of these companies are starting to shrink. And so people have less money to put into the stock market, and eventually on what's known as Black Tuesday in October of 1929, the stock market collapses. And over the next month, we see billions and billions of dollars wiped off the market. At the same time, people lose confidence in the economy. They start to withdraw their money, and this leads to further economic crunch, that there's just no money in the system. And the measures, and so this leads to, it becomes this vicious spiral, that people are withdrawing their money, they don't want to be invested in the stock market. This means that, and they're staying tight, they're not spending money, so this means that businesses aren't making a profit, aren't making money, and so the whole economy is grinding to a halt. And we see this in massive cuts to factories and to wages, and so you have about 25% of the workforce that's now unemployed. Many of these people are becoming homeless as they're unable to pay the mortgages on their houses. This was another way in which Americans had been encouraged to live on credit. And we see this not only of working men and women who are in the cities who are affected by this slowdown, but also in farms, because farm prices are falling at the same time. So all across the country you see widespread poverty. You see children who are growing up malnourished. You see birth rates that are falling. You see growing homelessness. And it seems as though the actions of the federal government are not helping people in this time of need. And this is also tied to Europe, that the European economy still hasn't recovered from World War I because of the massive reparations that were leveled on Germany. The Germans were depending on loans from American banks to keep their economy going. Once those banks are no longer able to lend to them, many of these banks have closed, it means that the Germans are no longer able to pay reparations to the British and the French. It means the British and the French are no longer able to pay off their war loans to the United States. And so again, you see the economy contract. The federal government, led by Herbert Hoover, tries to help, but their approach doesn't seem to have been successful. First, they tried to raise tariffs on products. This is designed to bring more money into the economy by artificially raising the prices of what's being sold. In the end, what it does is make more goods unaffordable to Americans. And so the poorest Americans become even poorer. A similar pattern we see with the Federal Reserve that shrinks the supply of money to try and rebalance the economy, to try and restrict inflation. Again, what this means is that money, access to currency, the ability to buy things becomes harder and harder, and again the economy tightens. Similarly, Herbert Hoover's other effort to increase taxes, to almost triple taxes. And his idea behind this is that if he raises taxes, more money will be coming into the federal government that can then refloat the economy. But what we see instead is that people are trying to avoid paying taxes, that they have less money to spend, and that businesses remain grounded, perhaps even worse grounded. And so this leads to resentment of the federal government that's not being successful in alleviating these economic difficulties. And so we see groups like the Farmers' Holiday and the Bonus Army. Farmers' Holiday wanted relief from having to pay the loans on their land. They used violence and intimidation to try and prevent judges from collecting on their loans. They threatened to withhold food from the market, so people or the country would suffer real shortages of food unless they were given this relief from paying their loans. The Bonus Army is a veterans group seeking their bonus from that they were owed from their service, but ahead of time. They camp out in Washington, D.C. and have to be driven out of their encampment by the army, something that Hoover had resisted, but then takes ownership for. It looks terrible from a public relations point of view that these men have fought for the United States. They're owed a bonus, they're seeking it early, and the new young army is being sent out to drive them away with violence. So the Great Depression, we see this sink into poverty in the United States, and we see resentment of the failures of the federal government to alleviate this poverty immediately, and this leads to the election of Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, who promises a new deal and new prosperity for the United States.